All right, period 4. We are jumping into our next topic today, and I decided to just give a video lesson a try. I did this a little bit last year, just so you know my expectations. Anything that I'm writing here on my screen should be written down in your notebooks. So we talked about at the beginning of the year how we label all of our pages. So your label up on top should say 4-3, and we're talking about proportions today. So I'll give you a second to write that down on top of your notes. And really, we have one big question, and you should be able to answer this question by the time you leave my class today. And that big question is, what is a proportion? This is a word that goes right along with ratios, but we need to define what they are. They really go hand in hand. So write our question down, what is a proportion? And hopefully you recognize the word, at least from 6th grade. I'm going to give you kind of a formal definition of it, but lucky for you, it involves something that you already know a little bit about. And so proportions really are just two ratios that are equal. Two ratios that are equal. So maybe you've seen them written before. Just for example, you'll see something like 1/2 or 1:2 as a ratio, and that is equal to 2:4. This would be a proportion because we can multiply 2 by 2 to get 4, and we can multiply 1 by 2 to get 2, and therefore these two ratios are equal, and that is what a proportion is, just a fancy word to describe that relationship. So really what we're going to jump into is just a couple examples and ways that we can determine if what we're looking at is in fact a proportion. So there's two different methods I'm going to present to you today. At the end of the class period, you can pick which one you like the best, and maybe certain scenarios will warrant the use of a different method. But write this heading down for yourself. We have two ways to determine, and the first way that we are going to jump into is writing them in simplest form. Now I'm hoping that when I say simplest form, your brain is triggered to stuff that we have learned already this school year. We just took a quiz on how to simplify ratios, and so we're just using that exact same method, and then we're going to compare the ratios in the end. So writing them in simplest form is my first method. And we're going to use this example to kind of walk us through it. So write down these two ratios. We have 10:24 and 25:60. And our job is now to write them in simplest form. So I'm going to start with 10:24. I know that I can divide both of them because they're even numbers by 2, so that's where I'll start. 10 divided by 2 gives me 5. And 24 divided by 2 gives me 12. 5 is a prime number, which means that it doesn't have any other factors or numbers that can be multiplied by other than 1. So that puts us here that this is it. This is in simplest form. So then we have to test our other ratio, which in this case is 25:60. I see one number ends in a 5 and the other ends in a 0, which means I can divide them both by 5. And when I do that, 25 divided by 5 is 5. And 60 divided by 5 is 12. So again, we are here in simplest form. And the question then is, are these two original ratios a proportion? And if once we have simplified them like we just did, they are equal, then yes, we can state these are. So your answer to this question would be yes, the ratios are equal. That would be your justification. Ratios are equal. So we'll try another one just to be safe, just to see what other options we might have. But simplifying ratios and then comparing them, if they match, then you do have a proportion. So example 2 then, we have the ratio 10:12 and 40:56. And our job again, we just want to simplify them and then see, do they match in the end? So if I take 10:12 and ask myself, what can I divide each of these ratios by? In this case, they are both even, so I'm going to start with 2, and once I simplify that down, I'm looking at 5 to 6. So that's the first ratio simplified. The second, we have 40 to 56. These are also both even numbers, so I'm going to start with 2 and see where that gets me. 40 divided by 2 gives me 20. And 56 divided by 2 gives me 28. Unfortunately, that wasn't good enough because we still have 2 even numbers. So this time I notice that these are both divisible by 4. So I'm going to jump right into dividing them both by 4. And I see 20 divided by 4 gives me 5. 28 divided by 4 gives me 7. Again, both of those are prime, so that would be simplest form. And we notice then that 5/6 is this in simplest form, and 5/7 is in simplest form, and these do not match. So these two ratios are not a proportion. The ratios are not equal. So that's it. We're just testing using simplest form. Do they match up in the end? The other method I want to show you, and maybe this will jog some of your memories, is actually my favorite of the two. And again, I'm going to let you pick. But this method is called cross multiplication. And I'm hoping that just a little friendly reminder of this system, you'll learn to love this method as well. So option number 2 is to cross multiply, and I'm going to show you how to do that with this set of ratio. So this would be the first example. We have the ratio 5 to 9, and then 30 to 54. And when we cross multiply here, it's pretty cool because just the name of the method kind of tells you what to do. We're going to use multiplication, and we're going to make a cross between the two numbers. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to take my 5, and I'm going to multiply it. I'm going to cross down and multiply it by 54. And then I'm going to write it, just for organization's sake, I'm going to write that number right down below it, because I know then that 5 times 54 gives me 270. And now I need to cross the other side. So I'm going to start up top and take 30 times 9. Again, we're multiplying. 30 times 9 gives me 270. And because these two numbers are equal when we cross multiply, our answer here would be yes, these are a proportion because the ratios are equal. And we could simplify too and do the whole division and we would get the same answer, but this is just kind of a two-step shop here, just crossing, multiplying the two numbers diagonal from each other and testing to see if they're equal. So let's try another one together. My second example we have in our notes would be 7 to 8. And then 55 to 65. So we're going to use that same cross multiplying. I'm going to start here with my 7, and I love just drawing this cross in here as a visual reminder. So 7 times 65, and I'm going to write my answer right down here. Continue that thought. I get 455. And then my other side, we take 55 times 8, and I get 440. And now this time we see that we can't put an equal sign in between. This is actually not equal. And so our statement would then be no, the ratios are not equal. And therefore, they do not form a proportion. Ratios are not equal. So I don't know which method you prefer. Maybe it's cross multiplying, maybe it's simplifying, but whichever one, I want you to pick one. And I have 4 extra problems I'd like you to do right here in the bottom of your notes. Pick whichever method you want to use. Again, my preference here would be to cross multiply, but really whichever one is going to work best for you, just continue to use. After you have these 4 problems solved, I want you to bring me your notebook and I'll just check and make sure all of the notes are in there and see that your answers are correct. And I've got a couple more for you to practice before you leave me today. So, go ahead and get started on these 4 problems.